Nova Station smelled like metal and foreign air. That was the first thing Mira noticed when she stepped off the transport. Not the towering glass corridors, not the alien delegates moving in clusters through the halls, not the strange colors of the lighting system that shifted between blue and amber every few hours. Just the smell, cold and sharp, like the inside of a machine. She stayed close to her father. Rail Oren was not a loud man. He never had been. He wore his diplomatic coat, dark gray, no medals, no decorations, and he walked through Nova Station the same way he did everything else. Quietly, with purpose. The other delegates, from a dozen different worlds, moved around him without acknowledging him much. That was normal. Humanity was still new to all of this. 2 centuries of interstellar travel sounded like a long time until you stood next to a species that had been doing it for 4,000 years. Mira did not mind being ignored. She had her sketchbook. That was enough. The summit had been scheduled for 3 days. Rail's job was to present Earth's case for expanded trade routes through the outer corridor, a stretch of space that the Confederation of 7 worlds technically controlled but rarely used. Earth needed those lanes. Not for war, not for expansion, for supply ships, for colony transports, for the slow and quiet business of keeping 300 million people on outer worlds alive. The Confederation's answer in the weeks before the summit had been silence. Their answer inside the summit hall was a wall of formal objections delivered by High Arbiter Voss. Mira watched him from the observer gallery. He was tall for his species. The Vethrani were tall by default, with a long pale face and eyes set too far apart. He spoke in a measured, rehearsed rhythm, and when he looked at the human delegation, he did it the way someone looks at something small on the floor that they haven't decided to step on yet. Her father listened, took notes, did not raise his voice. At the midday recess, Mira wandered. She didn't go far, just down the side corridor outside the main hall, where the light was a steadier blue and the foot traffic was thinner. She was sketching the architecture, the way the ceiling curved inward at strange angles, built for a species with wider peripheral vision than humans, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. High Arbiter Voss was there, flanked by 2 aides, moving toward the private delegate lounge at the corridor's end. He slowed when he saw her. His expression shifted, not to surprise, to something colder. Mira lowered her sketchbook. "Good afternoon, High Arbiter," she said. Her father had taught her the correct form of address. She used it precisely. Voss stopped. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that his aides shifted uncomfortably. Then he spoke. Not quietly. Not the way someone speaks when they want only the nearby people to hear. He spoke at a volume that carried. "This is a restricted corridor," he said. "Cleared for registered delegates only. Not for children carried along like luggage by second-tier petitioners." Mira went still. There were others in the corridor now. A Velhari trade official had rounded the corner and stopped. 2 journalists from the neutral press pool stood near the far wall. A station security officer looked up from his post. Voss continued. His tone was formal, ceremonial. Mira would learn later that he was using a specific register of Vethrani diplomatic language, the kind used for official rebukes. "I am entering a formal notation," he said, "that the human delegation has allowed an unregistered minor to enter observer-restricted space. This delegation's observer credentials are hereby suspended. Let the record show that this presence was—" He paused, choosing the word with care. "Unworthy of these halls." He walked past her. His aides followed. The door to the delegate lounge opened and closed. Mira stood in the corridor. She did not cry. She was not, in that moment, sad. She was something quieter than sad. She looked down at her sketchbook. She'd been drawing the ceiling, and she closed it carefully and held it against her chest. The Velhari trade official looked at her with something that might have been sympathy, if his species showed it the same way. The journalists were already writing. At the end of the corridor, standing near the security post, Commander Dasha Krell had watched the entire thing. She was head of Earth's diplomatic security detail, a compact woman with short dark hair and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to wait. She had not moved during Voss's speech. She had not spoken. She looked at Mira for a moment. Then she looked away, reached down to the comm unit clipped to her wrist, matte black, unremarkable, indistinguishable from standard station equipment, and pressed a single key. One word transmitted, encrypted, routed through 4 relay points to a receiver that was not listed on any public network directory. Mira walked back toward the summit hall to find her father. She would tell him what happened. He would listen carefully, the way he always did, and his expression would not change much. And later that night, she would hear him on a call she wasn't meant to hear, speaking in a very quiet voice. Far away, 3 kilometers beneath the Atacama Desert, in a facility that appeared on no civilian map, every screen in a vast command center lit up at the same time. The technicians did not panic. They had trained for this moment for years. They simply began their work. The desert was quiet at that hour. It was always quiet. 3 kilometers of rock and silence sat between the surface and the room where Admiral Sarah Vane read the incident report for the second time. She was not a woman who read things twice out of confusion. She read things twice when she wanted to be sure she was feeling what she thought she was feeling. She set the report down. She picked up her tea. She looked at the far wall of the command center, where 30 screens had come alive in the past 40 minutes, each one showing a different system status, power levels, navigation readiness, crew deployment alerts. She put the tea down without drinking it. "Pull up the full Article 9 file," she said. Director Paul Hagen was already at the adjacent console. He was a thin man, always slightly rumpled, with the look of someone who had been awake for longer than was advisable. He had been director of the Interstellar Diplomatic Intelligence Bureau for 11 years and had never once, in those 11 years, seen this particular command come through. "Article 9, subsection 4, he said, reading aloud as he pulled it up. "Formal ritual rebuke of a registered delegate's dependent, delivered in a public space before neutral witnesses, constitutes a diplomatic insult of the first category." He paused. They checked every box. Did he know what he was doing? Voss? Hagen considered it. He knew the form. I'm not sure he knew what the form meant on our end. They've never bothered to learn what our treaties actually permit us. That was the thing about the Confederation. They had decided, somewhere around the time humanity first reached the outer stars, that Earth was an interesting novelty, a young species with energy and ambition and very little else. They had watched humanity build stations and trade routes and small colonial outposts, and they had felt comfortable. Comfortable in the way that large things feel comfortable when smaller things are nearby and predictable. They had never looked carefully at what was in the asteroid belt. Admiral Vane stood and walked to the main display. The Warborn fleet was laid out in schematic. 400 vessels in staged formation, running on minimal power, silent as geology. They had been built over 8 decades, started by a generation that remembered the first hostile contact with the Kreth Fringe faction and decided quietly and without announcement that Earth would never again be caught without an answer. The ships were not elegant. They were not designed to impress. They were designed to function, specifically to function in the worst possible conditions, against the worst possible opposition, for as long as necessary. 3 of them were siege arcs. Each one was 2 kilometers long. No alien government knew they existed. Earth had not advertised them. There had been arguments over the decades about whether to reveal the fleet, to use its existence as a deterrent, to join the larger galactic conversation about military capability. The argument against, which had always won, was simpler. A weapon you haven't shown is a weapon they haven't planned for. Counselor Adra Yun joined them from the secure uplink. She appeared on the main screen, a composed woman in her 60s, silver-streaked hair, the faint look of someone managing 6 problems simultaneously. "I've spoken with the legal team," she said. "The grievance is legitimate. Voss performed the rebuke in full ceremonial register in front of a Velhari witness and press personnel. It's airtight." "Can we file it?" Vane asked. "Commander Krell is already filing it with the Nova Station Arbitration Board. It will likely be dismissed within hours. The board has Confederation-aligned members. But the filing itself is on public record." Yun paused. I want to be cautious here. This was one man being cruel to one child. I don't want to overreact." "We're not overreacting," Vane said. "We're responding. There's a difference." She turned back to the schematic. "The fleet wakes up. We don't move it. We just wake it up." There was a short silence on the uplink. "Agreed," Yoon said. The order went through the command center like a current. Across the asteroid belt, in the cold dark between rock and space, 400 ships began to stir. Power systems came online in sequence. Engines ran quiet diagnostic cycles. Crew quarters, sealed and preserved, began to warm. Automated systems ran pre-flight checks that had been waiting, patient and ready, for years. The INS Unbroken Ground, the lead siege arc, came fully online in 11 minutes. Its captain, Oren Vielle, was already at the bridge before the lights finished cycling up. Back on Nova Station, Commander Dasha Krell sat across a table from a station arbitration clerk and placed a formal Article 9 complaint on record. The clerk was Velhari, neutral species, known for precision and a particular dislike of procedural shortcuts. The clerk read the document 3 times, asked 2 clarifying questions, and stamped it into the public log. "This will be reviewed," the clerk said. "I know," Krell said. What she did not say was what she had already sent to Hagen's team. A note that the Velhari clerk had taken the filing seriously, that the clerk had, after stamping it, quietly cross-referenced it against 3 prior Confederation filings from other species, filings that had been dismissed, archived, and effectively buried. The clerk had done that without being asked. Krell walked back through the station's blue-lit corridors and thought about that. About how many buried filings there must be, from how many different species, if a Velhari arbitration clerk knew exactly where to look without even being prompted. In the Atacama, the screens burned steady and bright. The fleet was awake. The inquiry went out at 0300 station time, when most of Nova Station was between shifts and the corridors were thin with traffic. It came from Arbiter Juno Tal, a Velhari, senior member of the Neutral Arbitration Board. And it went not to 1 species, not to 10, but to every registered galactic civilization currently recognized under the terms of the Great Accord. The message was short, formal, precise in the way that Velhari communications always were. It asked, simply, whether any registered civilization had filed or attempted to file an unresolved Article 9 grievance against the Confederation of 7 Worlds in the past 200 years, and whether that grievance had been dismissed without hearing. Juno Tal sent it. Then he made himself a cup of the hot grain drink his people preferred, sat in his small arbitration office, and waited. He did not have to wait long. By 0700, 41 responses had arrived. By midday, the number was over 100. Liaison Sale, the Confederation's chief legal officer on Nova Station, received the news while preparing for what he had assumed would be a routine second day of summit proceedings. He read the number. He read it again. He set down his morning report and stood at the window of his office, looking out at the docking arms of the station, and felt something unfamiliar move through him. He sent an urgent message to Voss. He was told the High Arbiter was unavailable. He sent it again. Same answer. The hearing was announced before the afternoon session. Arbiter Juno Tal, exercising his authority as a neutral board member, called a formal assembly of all registered parties currently present on Nova Station, with remote connection open to any civilization wishing to observe. It was not a trial. Not yet. It was, in the precise language of the Accord, a collective grievance review, something that had not been called in over 60 years. Rail Oren sat at the human delegation's table and listened as species after species associated themselves with the complaint. The Orvani went first, a quiet people with long memories and a 300-year-old trade dispute the Confederation had buried. Then the Harali, then the twin species consortium of the Dean and the Ravel, then others, some of whom Rail had never heard of, small civilizations from the Outer Arm who had filed paperwork decades ago and received nothing in return but silence. He watched each one stand. He kept his face still. Ambassador Dren of the Orvani gave a short statement. He did not speak about his own species' grievances at length. He simply said that when a civilization is willing to humiliate a child in public, it is not because that civilization lacks manners. It is because that civilization has learned over time that there are no consequences. That habit, he said, does not grow in one place. It spreads. The gallery was full. Species that had no formal grievance had sent observers anyway. Journalists from a dozen neutral outlets were present. The feed was being broadcast across the galactic network in real time. Liaison Sale watched from the side of the room. He tried once more to reach Voss. This time, an aide answered and told him the High Arbiter was monitoring the proceedings privately and had no comment. Sale looked at the room, at the growing list of associated parties on the board behind Arbiter Tal, at the human delegate, sitting quietly, making notes. Then, Rael Oren was asked to speak. He stood. He did not bring notes to the podium. He had drafted something more formal, something his staff had reviewed and approved, but he had left it on the table. He stood at the podium and spoke in plain language. He said that his daughter had greeted High Arbiter Voss with the correct formal address for his rank, that she had done so politely in a public corridor, and that she had been told in the full ceremonial register of Vethrani diplomatic language, done deliberately, with full awareness of its weight, that she was unworthy of the halls she stood in. He said he was not there to call for punishment. He was there to ask one question. What kind of order are we building out here? What does it mean when the most powerful voice in the room can silence a 12-year-old girl for saying good afternoon and face no accounting for it? Not because the rules don't exist. They do. But because no one believed the rules would ever apply to them. He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Sub-Arbiter Cale Drun, a younger Confederation official seated in the observer section, not at the delegate table because he had no formal authority here, because he was present only as a secondary attaché, stood up without being recognized and said, loudly enough for the record to capture, High Arbiter Voss was wrong. He sat back down. Sale stared at him. Cale Drun stared at the floor. In his private viewing room 3 corridors away, Voss watched the hearing reach its 3rd hour and made a decision. He did not consult Sale. He did not call the Confederation Council. He simply sent a formal withdrawal notice. The Confederation was removing itself from the Arbitration Board's jurisdiction, effective immediately, on the grounds that the board had exceeded its procedural mandate. It was the move of someone who believed that leaving the table ends the game. He did not know about the Sovereign Remedy Clause. Very few people did. It was buried deep in the Accord's founding text, written 2 centuries ago by species who had seen what happened when the powerful refused to be held to account. Arbiter Juno Tal read the withdrawal notice. He set it down. He opened a different document. He began to read. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when something unprecedented happens. Not the silence of shock. That is louder, full of held breath and widened eyes. This was the other kind, the silence of people realizing that the world has just shifted under them, and that they are going to have to live in the new arrangement whether they are ready or not. That silence fell over the galactic broadcast network the moment the Warborn fleet exited the solar system. It came out of nothing. One moment, long-range scanners across the neutral zone were reading normal traffic. Cargo haulers, a few Confederation patrol vessels, the usual background noise of a busy corridor. The next moment, 400 human ships dropped out of transit in tight formation and held position at the edge of neutral space, running full navigation lights, broadcasting standard identification signals, doing nothing aggressive whatsoever. They simply existed, in full view of every scanner in the region, for the first time in human history. The Harali monitoring station at Relay Point 7 sent an alert that was later described, by the officer who wrote it, as the most difficult report of his career, not because of what he had to say, but because he had no frame of reference for saying it. He had been trained to recognize every known fleet in the galaxy. These ships matched nothing in any database. Fleet Captain Oren Vile sat on the bridge of the INS Unbroken Ground and looked at the starfield ahead. The siege arc was quiet at this speed, a low vibration through the deck, the hum of systems running at a fraction of their capacity. Around them, 399 other vessels held perfect formation. He opened a public channel, not encrypted, not restricted to diplomatic frequencies, a broad, open broadcast receivable by any ship within range. He spoke slowly and clearly in Standard Galactic, which every registered species had agreed to use for common communications. He said that Earth was not threatening anyone. He said that Earth was exercising its legal right under Article 12, subsection 9 of the Great Accord, the Sovereign Remedy Clause, applicable when a party withdraws from arbitration to avoid accountability, to position forces in neutral space while seeking resolution through available channels. He said the fleet would not advance. It would not fire. It would hold position until a legal path forward was established. Then he listed one by one every civilization that had formally associated with Earth's grievance. It took 4 minutes to read the full list. On Veth Prime, the Confederation's capital world, Voss watched the broadcast from his estate's private viewing room. He was standing by the time Vial finished speaking. His aide, who had been trying to reach him for the past 2 hours, finally got through. "High Arbiter," the aide said carefully. "The Council is requesting your presence." "I see that," Voss said. "They are using the Emergency Assembly Protocol." Voss said nothing for a moment. On the screen, the schematic of the human fleet rotated slowly. Someone on the news network had compiled it from scanner data. The siege arcs were labeled with question marks because no analyst had a category for them. The question marks looked almost gentle against the size of the ships. Sub-Arbiter Cale Drun was in his own office on Nova Station, watching the same broadcast. He had been in diplomatic service for 9 years. He had spent most of those years watching the Confederation operate with the quiet certainty of an organization that had never, not once, been seriously challenged. He thought about what it would mean, not just politically, but in the simpler human equivalent sense, to be the civilization that had spent 2 centuries dismissing everyone, and to look up one day and see this. He sent a private message to Liaison Sael. It said only, "Tell him to withdraw the withdrawal. There is still a path, but it closes fast." Sael read the message. He looked at the fleet schematic on his own screen. He sent the message to Voss. He received no reply. On Nova Station, Mira Oren was sitting in the small room her father had been given for the duration of the summit. She had her sketchbook open. She was not drawing. She was looking at the wall. A journalist from the Velhari Press Network had knocked on the door an hour ago and asked for an interview. Her father had declined on her behalf, politely, in writing. Then a journalist from the Orvani Network. Then someone she didn't recognize. She didn't want to be a symbol. She had just wanted to draw the ceiling. Her father came in and sat beside her. He didn't say anything about the fleet. She had seen the news. She knew. And she didn't ask. They sat quietly for a while. "Are we going home soon?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Soon." She opened the sketchbook and turned to a fresh page. She began to draw Voss from memory, his long, pale face, his 2 wide eyes, the particular set of his shoulders when he had spoken to her in the corridor. She drew him carefully, without exaggeration. He looked, on the page, like a tired man. Back in the Atacama, Admiral Sarah Vane received the report that Voss had ordered his military fleet to intercept and escort the Warborn vessels back to human space. She read the order. She read it again. She set it down. "He thinks we'll move," she said. Director Hagen said nothing. "He thinks that's what this is," she said. "A bluff." She turned back to the screens. 400 ships, holding position, engines at minimum. Waiting. "All right," she said. "Let him find out." Fleet Marshal Dovin had commanded the Confederation's 2nd Intercept Fleet for 12 years. He had handled border disputes, escorted dignitaries through hostile corridors, turned back pirate incursions in the outer systems. He had never once, in those 12 years, been ordered to do something he considered genuinely dangerous. Until now. His fleet came out of transit at the designated intercept point, and the first thing his scanning team gave him was a full sensor reading of the human formation. He read it in silence. Then he asked for it again, because he assumed something had been miscalculated. The second reading matched the first. The siege arcs alone were larger than anything in the Confederation's active fleet inventory. Not slightly larger, significantly, unmistakably larger, and there were 3 of them, sitting at the center of the formation like quiet mountains. Weapon systems? He asked his tactical officer. Powered down, sir. All of them. Across all 400 vessels. Dovin stood at the viewing window for a while. He was not a man who showed his thoughts on his face. That was a quality the Confederation valued in its fleet commanders. But the officer standing nearest to him would later describe his expression as that of someone who had opened a door, expecting a closet, and found a cathedral. He opened a private channel to the human fleet. Not a broadcast, a direct ship-to-ship line. He waited. Admiral Sarah Vane took the call personally from the Atacama Command Center. Dovin said, "Admiral, I want to speak plainly." Vane said, "Please. I have orders to escort your fleet back to human space." He paused. "I am not going to pretend that I believe my fleet is capable of enforcing those orders. I'm also not going to pretend that firing on a fleet whose weapons are powered down would be anything other than an atrocity." "No," Vane said. "It wouldn't." "What I want to know," Dovin said, "is what you actually want. Not the legal position, not the formal statement. What resolves this?" Vane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We want the arbitration to proceed. We want the grievances on record, ours and every other species that filed one, to be heard. We want Voss to face the Confederation's own council." She paused. "We are not here to break anything. We are here because the normal channels were closed before we could use them." Dovin said, "That I understand." The standoff held for 19 hours. During that time, the galactic broadcast networks ran continuous coverage. 2 more species formally joined Earth's grievance, then 4 more. Then, in a development that caused Liaison Sail to sit down and not get up for some time, 2 minor Confederation member worlds sent private messages to the arbitration board expressing support for the hearing's reinstatement. The Confederation was not a monolith. It had never been. It was 7 worlds bound together by trade agreements and historical inertia, and the accumulated weight of being the biggest entity in the room for a very long time. What Voss had never understood, what he had refused to consider, was that several of those 7 worlds had their own quiet frustrations with the way he operated. They were watching the same screens as everyone else. In the 19th hour, Dovin received the message from Voss directly. It was an order, issued in the formal command register. It directed him to open fire on the human fleet and end the standoff by force. Dovin read it. He read it a second time. He set it down on the console in front of him. He turned to his crew. Every officer on the bridge was looking at him. "No," he said. He logged a formal command refusal, a procedure that existed in Confederation military code, but had been used fewer than a dozen times in 2 centuries, always in cases where an order was deemed to be in clear violation of the laws of armed engagement. He cited the human fleet's powered-down weapons. He cited the absence of any hostile act. He cited, directly and by article number, the Galactic Accord's prohibition on first strike aggression against a party engaged in legal remedy proceedings. Then he opened the private channel to Vane again and told her what he had done. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Marshal." He said, "Don't thank me. Just end this cleanly." On Nova Station, Voss received word of the refusal at the same moment the Confederation Council sent him a second emergency summons. He ignored the council. He turned instead to the one lever he believed he still had. He issued an order to his station security detail. Detain Rail Orin. The charge, invented in the space of 10 minutes, was interference with Confederation diplomatic proceedings. It was thin. It would not survive any legal review. But it didn't need to. He only needed it to hold long enough to use Rail as a pressure point, to force Earth into a negotiation on his terms, to give himself something to trade. His security team moved into the diplomatic wing corridor. Commander Dasha Krell was already there. She had not been alerted. She had simply been doing what she always did, walking the corridor at irregular intervals, checking sightlines, noting who was present and where. When she saw the security team moving with purpose toward the human quarters, she understood immediately what it was. She did not reach for a weapon. She did not call for backup. She just walked to the center of the corridor and stood there and waited for them to come to her. The security team's leader was a mid-level Confederation officer named Drell. He had been on Nova Station for 8 months, had never been involved in a diplomatic incident, and had spent most of his posting reviewing cargo manifests and running access audits. Arresting a human delegate was not something he had trained for. Arresting a human delegate while a human woman in a security vest stood in the middle of the corridor and looked at him like she was waiting for him to make a decision. That was something no training would have prepared him for anyway. Dasha Krell let him get within 4 meters. Then she spoke. "Before you proceed," she said, "I want to make sure you understand what you are doing." Her voice was calm, not threatening, simply informational, the way someone reads a label before signing it. "You are acting on an arrest order issued by High Arbiter Voss. High Arbiter Voss is currently under emergency review by the Confederation Council. That review was initiated 40 minutes ago. I have the Council notification right here." She held up her comm unit. The notification was on the screen. Drell looked at it. "If you proceed," she said, "Nova Station's public log will record that you detained a registered Earth diplomatic delegate under orders from an official whose authority is suspended, while that official's own government is reviewing his conduct." She paused. "I want you to be sure that's what you want on record." Drell looked at the notification. He looked at his team. 6 officers, all of them very still. He looked back at Krell. He made the call on his own. He lowered his hand. He turned his team around and walked back the way he had come. Krell watched them go. Then she turned and stood outside the door to the human quarters and did not move for the next 3 hours until the situation was formally resolved. The resolution came quickly after that. The Confederation Council, meeting in emergency session, voted within 6 hours to remove Voss from his position pending a full internal review. Sub-Arbiter Kale Drun, who had logged his own unofficial dissent on the public record, was appointed acting liaison. His first official act was to transmit to the Arbitration Board a formal request for reinstatement of the Collective Grievance Review. Arbiter Juno Tal accepted the request without delay. The second official act, drafted by Drun, but approved by the full Council, was a formal apology to the Earth delegation and to Mira Oren specifically, entered into the public record of the Galactic Accord. It was written in careful legal language. It did not use warm words. But it was an apology, the first time the Confederation of 7 Worlds had ever formally apologized to a non-member species for anything. When the news reached the Atacama, Admiral Vera Vane read the apology document once. She set it down. She looked at the screens where the fleet schematic still glowed, 400 ships holding formation, patient and still. "Stand down," she said. "Bring them home." The order moved through the fleet in sequence. One by one, systems powered back to minimal. Navigation plots updated. The Warborn fleet turned, not in haste, not in retreat, and began moving back toward the solar system in the same tight formation it had held throughout, steady, unhurried. It disappeared from galactic scanners the way it had always lived, quietly, without announcement, as if it had never been there at all. Fleet Marshal Dovin watched it go from his bridge. He did not speak for a while. Then he said to no one in particular, "They were never going to fire." His tactical officer said, "No, sir. That's what made it work," Dovin said. On Nova Station, Rael Oren accepted the Confederation's apology on behalf of Earth in a brief statement. He did not gloat. He did not list what humanity had demonstrated. He simply said that Earth hoped this would be the beginning of a more honest relationship between the Confederation and its own members, and between the Confederation and the wider galaxy. Then he went to find his daughter. Mira was packed. She had her bag over one shoulder and her sketchbook in her hand. She was ready to go home. She had been ready for days. They walked to the transport bay together. She flipped through the sketchbook while they waited. The ceiling drawings from the first day, the alien delegates, the architectural details she had managed to capture before everything changed. Near the back, the sketch of Voss. She had spent a long time on it. He looked, on the page, like a man who had once believed he was the most important person in every room he entered, and who had recently learned otherwise. Rael looked at the sketch without comment. "Should I throw it away?" she asked. He looked at it for a long moment. "Keep it," he said. She closed the sketchbook. "She In the months that followed, dozens of species filed long-ignored grievances through the newly functional arbitration system. The Confederation began quietly, reforming its diplomatic protocols. Cale Drun became a permanent fixture of those reforms. Fleet Marshal Dovin submitted a report recommending a complete reassessment of Confederation military assumptions. Its conclusions leaked within a week. Do not assume you know what any civilization is capable of until you have actually looked. And deep in the asteroid belt, in the cold dark between rock and silence, the Warborn fleet returned to its long sleep. 400 ships, still and patient, waiting, hoping, as it had always hoped, that it would never need to wake again. It was, Admiral Vane thought, the best possible outcome, not because the fleet had done nothing, but because doing nothing had been enough.